Economic Flying Factoids. August 1, 2019 by Anna von Reitz. For those of a certain age, you will recognize the flying factoids as a byproduct of the flying fickle finger of fate. I keep getting questions from people that indicate an ongoing level of confusion about economics that needs to be dealt with, so I am setting this up as several separate topics to answer these questions. Most people could benefit from contemplating the answers. 1. Abeyance My Foot. They have claimed that our government is in abeyance, a sort of suspended animation, not dead, not alive, just sort of sitting on idle for 150 years. This is because certain parties have deliberately chosen to mistake a business organization for the employer thereof. This would be like mistaking your housecleaning service or the guy who mows your lawn for you. They claimed that Wisconsin was in abeyance because the original entity doing business as the state of Wisconsin went bankrupt and was never reconstructed after the Civil War. One is tempted to say, so what? Obviously, the power that delegated all the power ever held by the state of Wisconsin is capable of either fronting a new service organization of its own or hiring someone else, but instead, the Brits usurped the position of the state of Wisconsin by substituting their own territorial version, the state of Wisconsin, and used semantic deceit to cover it up. If we had been properly informed and supported by our employees, this bunco by the British could never have succeeded. Now that it is discovered, it can no longer succeed. We are faced with the responsibility of self-governance, and it is a burden that carries with it our freedom and our property rights. We therefore have no choice. We have to assemble our states of the Union, reconstruct the federal states of states we are owed, and get on with the business of restoring a fully functioning and properly structured federal government for ourselves. Restoration comes first, followed by reform. 2. The first scam gives rise to the second. Having substituted their own corporate franchises for ours, the territorial government threw up its hands in the equivalent of a coy school girl and basically said, "Oh, my. How are we to fund the government in the absence of our employers?" It was quite simple really. The military confiscated everything under a British-controlled protectorate, placed false claims and liens against all our property, public and private, and borrowed against it. This was pretty raw and contrary to basic law, including the Ten Commandments, so they refined this over time and made up a new vocabulary to smooth over the rape and pillaging of our country and our people by foreign interests. This is now called hypothecating debt, where someone surreptitiously seizes title to someone else's property, borrows against the value of someone else's assets, and leaves the victim to pay for it. Hypothecation of debt is fraud by another name. It's a form of theft by deception and assumption. People think that their own legitimate government is doing this to them, so they make their best effort to pay and they assume that the debt is theirs. In fact, they have no contract obligating them to pay the debts of these foreign corporations and it isn't their government. It's just a foreign commercial corporation in the business of providing governmental services acting under color of law. That is, they give you the impression that they are the government and acting with the government's authority, but in fact, they aren't your government and have no such authority. They are spoofing you into paying for whatever services they want to offer you and charging whatever price they like to, then enforcing this situation using the pretense that they have some legitimate authority or right to do this, when they don't. This is called operating under color of law. 3. Over time it became more apparent that something was wrong, so increasingly sophisticated obfuscations and confusions have been developed, all designed to pass their debts onto you by any means fair or foul. The administration under FDR, the corporate government of the offending commercial corporation administering the military protectorate, was obliged to set up a system of mutual offset credit exchanges as remedy to this outright theft. The idea is that they owe us for the use and abuse of our property as chattel backing their debts, and we owe them for services they provide. So both owe money to the other. This is a situation where you owe me $100 and I owe you 10, so we agree to reduce your debt to me by $10 and now, you only owe me 90. This is all well and good, except that the rats never told you a word about this arrangement and did not provide any well-explained or obvious means to execute such a transaction. It remained something that government insiders could use, but all the victims were kept out and prevented from accessing this relief by a code of silence. Gradually, because they obstructed your access to this remedy, their national debt simply continued to grow and with Obama in power, to skyrocket. They explained this circumstance to the rest of the world by claiming that we all gifted our estates to them and deliberately abandoned our claims to be repaid. How convenient. That's how they wound up with a $25 trillion national debt, by never exchanging any of the debt they owed to us. That is, they continued to rack up debt against our assets and never returned any of the credit they owed to us. They intended to discharge their debt in bankruptcy, and to saddle us with paying it off for them as purported co-signers and accommodation parties, all without our knowledge or consent. Of course, only this time, the people they deluded into extending them credit based on our assets wanted to be paid off. So they concocted yet another duplicitous scheme, false letters of administration. 4. This is where the dead baby scheme kicks in, where they claim that you were born dead based on the fetal afterbirth material they collected and named after you at the hospital. They claim that John Michael Doe died within a short time after his birth at the hospital where he was admitted by the attending physician's signature. You, meanwhile, technically don't exist. Think about it. Your mother was admitted to the hospital pregnant. The afterbirth entity was admitted to hospital as a poor dying person named with your name. You were never admitted to the hospital so far as the hospital records are concerned. You are nobody. Literally. Even though your DNA is the same as the dead baby's, and you are in fact the living being inheritor of any estate he or she left behind, the state of state has probated your estate and claimed it as public property underlying their debt. They then set up letters of administration, giving members of the Bar Association control of the estates that purportedly belong to all these dead babies that just happen to be named after us. Neat, huh? 72 different ways to screw the American people senseless, all orchestrated, allowed, and promoted by their public employees, both the federal military and federal civil service and all the judges and bar members and police attached to them. That's why the vermin were parading around the effigy of a giant dead baby in a coffin at the London Winter Olympics. If I could, simply by thinking about it, I would erase every lawyer who participated in any of this. They would simply cease to exist in the physical sense, in the same way that they have attempted to genocide us on paper. It's time that we started showing them that the baby survived, grew up, and is here to claim back their estate. And it's also time for the whole world to hold the Queen and the Pope and the Lord Mayor of London and the cretins in Congress responsible for these outrages. 5. Why a GCR cannot happen. People have been staking their hopes on a global currency reset GCR, but it should be apparent that no such thing can happen, at least not the way they are expecting it to happen. Why? Because those promoting and executing it would be admitting to crime. They have been rigging the currency as a commodity, like any commodity, for a long time. They've been sitting around on their duffs arbitrarily deciding that the money of Nigeria is worth 1/13 of a fiat petrodollar, for example. They have a giant slush fund called the Exchange Stabilization Fund set up to enable them to enforce these kinds of decisions. They've been doing this for decades and it is completely immoral, illegal, and unlawful for them to meddle in the world currency markets this way, but they have done it anyway. So you expect them to come out with a GCR and show everyone that they can do this? And you expect them to admit that they have been doing this for a long time, and that any decisions that they make now are just as arbitrary as the decisions they made then? Hello? No matter what they did to tweak the valuation of the dollar or the yen or the ruble, it's just pure self-interested and otherwise arbitrary committee nonsense that has no basis in any actual factual market for currency commodities. They are literally sitting around saying, "Oh, I don't know, Jamie, what do you think? Put the yen up 4 points today? Not today. Wait a week." They quibble back and forth like this among themselves, trying to edge out this economy or that, via manipulation of the value of that country's currency. As a result, there is no free market in world currencies and no way to prove or assess the actual value of any national currency. Part of Mr. Obama's job for the Queen and Lord Mayor was to counterfeit and release trillions of unauthorized $100 Federal Reserve notes. Because he controlled the presses and actually exported money printing presses, engraving plates, special inks and papers to foreign locations all over the world, there is no way to tell the difference between these counterfeits issued in places like Thailand, and those dollars printed by the US Mint. And guess what? They all carry serial numbers attached to our estates. According to the vermin doing this, we issued those promissory notes. You and I. According to them. Meantime, the Queen's hubby, Prince Philip, has collected all the life force value annuities owed from the life insurance policies the vermin took out on all the dead babies and their estates. So there can't be a GCR, and if there were, it would be arbitrary and criminal. And those responsible would be exposed simply by showing their ability to do such a thing. 7. People ask me, what do I do about buying a house? You can't buy a house under the current scenario. Nobody has been able to buy a house in this country since the 1930s. All you get is a future lease payment agreement and the privilege of paying off the debts these vermin have already placed against the property as an asset. And at the end of the day, it is still their property, not yours. The only difference is that you have paid off their mortgage. You, of course, never had a mortgage in the first place. You're dead, remember? Or you never existed. One way or the other, the lousy crooks have mucked things up to the point where there is no private property, at least according to them, on paper. It has all been confiscated and administered under the false pretense that you, A, voluntarily gifted your estate to them, B, you knowingly abandoned and waived your estate, C, you are incompetent, because, obviously, if you knew what was going on and were competent, you'd object. You'd find the means to shove this whole wad of shinola back down their throats. Which is where we are right about now. So don't enter into a mortgage and help them out. Get rid of any mortgage you have by any means, fair or foul. Dump this all on the heads of the bankers and the military and the lawyers and the politicians that have concocted this morass of criminal deceits, lies, false claims, and genocide of innocent third parties on paper. It's payback time, and you have better things to do than to pay back their mortgage on your property for them. See this article and over 1900 others on my website www.annavonreitz.com. To support this work, look for the PayPal buttons on my website.